Every 60 seconds, younger Arlo scrolls on Instagram. I need a break. I can't focus for too long. I need to divert my attention. It helps me focus. Oh, a new post. What younger Arlo doesn't know is that doing this is doing more harm than good. Older Arlo knows the drastic effects of constant attention switching. He knows that doing so weakens his attention span, his focus, and drive to overcome challenges and solve problems. He knows that it's more fun to do something more physically demanding rather than moving the thumb. And for that, he doesn't consume social media as much as he did before. In this video, I'll be sharing with you 3 ways you're destroying your productivity. Let's not waste any more time and start with the first one. The first way you're... Number 1, multitasking and multi-focusing. Now, what's the difference between the two? Well, multitasking involves doing 2 tasks at the same time, but they don't necessarily mean you need immense focus for both of them. For instance, listening to music while studying, talking to someone while sweeping the floor, or counting the number of reps while working out. As you can see, one task accompanies the other. This is why we get shower thoughts when we're in the shower. It's because we're feeling relaxed, which stimulates our brains to think creatively. Of course, there are bad multitasking. These types make things less efficient, and the time taken to do them simultaneously would be greater in total than doing them separately. And by that I mean, if you did them one by one, you would save more time. This is where multi-focusing comes in. Have you ever tried focusing on writing something, then suddenly someone talks to you, you guys have a chat, and once that's over, you go back to writing. But you find it a bit hard to focus again, and you might have forgotten what you were writing about and your attention has depleted. This is one of the risks of multi-focusing, because there's this thing called attention residue, wherein when we switch from one task to another, it's hard to pay attention to the new task again. In fact, let me share 5 real risks of multitasking. 1. Multitasking is associated with harm to our brains. A recent study found that people who were frequent media multitaskers had reductions in their brain gray matter, specifically in areas related to cognitive control and the regulation of motivation and emotion. Number 2. Multitasking can lead to memory problems. This 2016 study found that chronic media multitaskers exhibited weakness in both working memory, which is the ability to store relevant information while working on a task, and long-term memory, which is the ability to store and recall information over longer periods of time. Number 3, multitasking can lead to increased distractibility. Researchers studied that people's multitasking at home over a 7-day period and found that the more people multitasked, the more likely they were to exhibit behavioral distractibility. In other words, the more likely they would be distracted. And current assumptions are that by responding to so many distractions, one loses the ability to distinguish between important and unimportant interruptions. Number 4, multitasking hurts your grades and the grades of those around you. A study of multitasking in the classroom found that students who multitask on their computers during a lecture scored lower on their exams, as did classmates who were in a direct view of them. This is why we hate other people texting on their phones when we're at the movies. It's distracting even when we're not the ones doing the texting. And number 5, multitasking increases chronic stress, depression, and social anxiety. A study of college students found that the more students multitask with using their computers, the more stress they experience. The constant bombardment of information to which they were trying to respond elevated their stress responses, which means that chronic multitasking can lead to chronic stress. Researchers examined the link between multitasking, media use, and emotional health. While there was no correlation between media use and negative outcomes in this particular study, the team did find that the more participants multitasked, the more likely they were to report symptoms of depression and social anxiety. So with all these reasons in mind, you should only do one task at a time until full completion. That is my suggestion. And you should do this before moving on to the next task. Dedicate 110% to the task you're doing right now, and if it still bothers you that you got an amazing idea or you got an amazing thing that you want to try out for this task, I suggest that you write it down on a piece of paper or on a to-do list. Once you're done with all the important things to do, refer to the to-do list and ask yourself for each thing that you wrote down, should I really do this? Do I really want to do this? If yes, then go ahead by all means. Go add that extra design, add that extra cheese topping. But if no, that's perfectly fine, because it's not that important. Now, even if you are talented enough to be able to go back to writing after being distracted, The fact of the matter is, we can't write while having conversation at the same time. I tried it, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people have tried it, and it's just difficult. It becomes a distraction. So this segues to my second point, which is task switching. Task switching or task interleaving is when a task is voluntarily or involuntarily interrupted in order to pay attention to another task. The problem with task switching is this concept called attention residue, as I've said before. It means that when we switch from one task to another, we're still thinking about our previous task. Therefore, it becomes more difficult to focus on the newer task. And this is why when you jump from one task to another without finishing it beforehand, it becomes harder to focus or get into the state of easily solving the problem. It's like our mind has refreshed first and it overall just makes us less productive. On to my third point, which is lack of direction. And this takes me back to the time I practiced basketball. Now I would practice pretty frequently, or 4 to 5 times in a day, and for long periods of 1 to 2 hours at a time. But I noticed that my teammates who practice not as much as me improved faster. So I thought to myself, what gives? And then I dawned on the realization that my practices on my own, they weren't really effective. I was just shooting the ball, just walking over, rebound the ball, wherever I stood, I would shoot again, then just walk in, get the ball. There was no passion, there was no plan of action, there was no goal, there was no focus on what I had to improve on. I was just being on autopilot. So in other words, I lacked a direction. So then on, I started practicing with intention. I actually practiced less and less frequently, but with a more intention and with more direction. And I actually improved faster compared to my previous way of practicing. So my lesson here is that you can set an intention by really diving deep into what you plan to do. Don't say do homework. Write down the subject, the time allotted, the resources you need, and why you're doing it. The why is important here because if the why is clear, then the how becomes easy to follow. But of course, you have to see what the problems are. Because when you see what the problems you're having in one thing, you'll be able to think of the solutions that will make you catapult your growth to a better direction. Lack of direction could also mean that doing this doesn't. Lack of direction could also mean doing this that doesn't. When you feel aimless and nothing seems to pique your interest, learning becomes an almost impossible task. So your performance can decrease and you gradually begin to lose your motivation. And this takes me back to practicing guitar. I used to take lessons when I was younger, but I wasn't that interested. I just joined because my parents enrolled. So I attended lessons and that was it. I never practiced on my own. I didn't feel excited, and I was just doing what I was told. Then years later, I saw guitar covers on YouTube, and I thought, hey, it'd be fun to try them out. And that's when it began. I fell in love with learning and trying and failing and getting better, and I now have a reason to practice every day. It didn't feel like a chore, instead it felt like a privilege. I had a reason to pick up the guitar, and what was the reason? Well, it was fun. Come on now, music feels good, and who wouldn't want to listen to or play music? But of course, this drive had to come from within. It was an interior motivation instead of an external motivation. When I was forced to go to classes, when my parents told me to join, it was different. So remember that I said it's a personal drive. Fulfillment comes from internal motivation, and it's up to you to find it. So to summarize the 3 ways to improve your productivity, do tasks one at a time. Focus 110% on said tasks and have an intentional plan of action. And that, my friends, is how to avoid the 3 things that kill your productivity. If you wish to ask me more questions, message me the word productivity on Messenger, link in the description. That way I can back to you, and if we can, have a free one-on-one call, that'll be great. So do the hard work, especially when you don't feel like it. Stay productive.